I'm Sabrina, 34, and in my family I was always the square peg trying to fit into a round hole. While my parents and sister built their real estate empire, I fell in love with computers and cybersecurity. They drove luxury cars and lived in mansions. I chose a modest apartment and poured my heart into technology. When my grandmother died, they got millions. I got a storage unit full of what they called worthless junk. Good luck, loser. My sister laughed as I walked away. If you're watching this, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from because what I found in that worthless junk changed everything. Growing up in our sprawling Connecticut estate, I always felt like I was living in someone else's dream. My father Richard built his real estate company from the ground up, transforming a small property management firm into a statewide empire. By the time I was 10, Thompson Properties was the name everyone recognized on commercial buildings and luxury residential developments across the state. My mother Eleanor, with her perfect pearls and country club memberships, orchestrated our family's social standing with the precision of a symphony conductor. Then there was my sister Catherine, 2 years older than me and groomed from birth to be the heir to the Thompson legacy. She had our father's business acumen and our mother's social grace, the perfect blend of qualities valued in our household. Catherine excelled at everything our parents deemed important: tennis at the country club, straight A's in economics and business classes, networking with the children of other wealthy families. She was the golden child, the walking embodiment of our family's values and aspirations. And then there was me. From the moment I discovered my first computer at age 8, I was transfixed. While Catherine was learning about property values and investment portfolios, I was taking apart old computers and teaching myself to code. The logic of programming made sense to me in a way that social climbing and business deals never did. The internet was just becoming mainstream, and I saw the future in technology, not in brick-and-mortar buildings. "Computers are just a fad, Sabrina," my father would say with a dismissive wave of his hand whenever I tried to share my latest coding project. "Real wealth is built on tangible assets. You can't touch a website." My mother was equally dismissive, though, in her own subtle way. "Darling, it's fine to have hobbies, but don't you think you're spending too much time alone with those machines? Catherine is captain of the debate team now, you know. Wouldn't you like to try something like that? Something that will help you make connections." The first major rupture in our family dynamic came during my senior year of high school. Dinner in the Thompson household was always a formal affair. My mother insisted on maintaining certain standards regardless of who was present. That particular evening, the housekeeper had prepared beef Wellington, my father's favorite, and we were seated at the mahogany dining table that could accommodate 20 but usually just held the four of us separated by expanses of polished wood. "I've decided where I want to go to college," I announced after the usual discussion of my father's latest property acquisition and my mother's charity gala planning. My parents exchanged looks before my father put down his fork. "Well, I assume you've applied to the business programs we discussed. Harvard would be my preference, of course, but Wharton has an excellent reputation as well." I took a deep breath. "Actually, I've been accepted into the computer science program at Stanford. It's one of the best in the country for tech, and Silicon Valley is right there for internships." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My father's expression hardened into the same look he wore when negotiating difficult business deals. Catherine, however, smirked behind her wine glass. "Computer science," my father finally said, as if the words tasted bitter. "Sabrina, we've talked about this. The plan has always been for you to get a business degree and join the family company. Catherine will handle the development side, and you'll manage the financial aspects. That's what we've been preparing for." "No, that's what you've been preparing for," I countered, feeling a surge of courage. "I've never wanted to join the family business. I want to work in technology and cybersecurity specifically. That's where the future is heading." My mother set down her utensils with a delicate clink. "Darling, be reasonable. The Thompson name means something in real estate. In this computer business, you'd be starting from nothing. Why throw away the advantages you were born with?" Catherine couldn't contain herself any longer. She just wants to be different, Mom. She always has. Remember when everyone was wearing those Tiffany charm bracelets for the 8th grade graduation, and Sabrina showed up with that weird circuit board thing she made? It was a wearable LED display that I programmed myself, I muttered, but no one was listening. Stanford is across the country. My father pointed out, his voice taking on the stern tone that usually ended discussions in our house. You'd be throwing away everything we've built for you here on the East Coast. Our connections, our reputation. For what? To play with computers. I looked around at their faces. My father's stern disapproval, my mother's worried disappointment, Catherine's barely concealed satisfaction at seeing me in trouble, and realized in that moment that they would never understand. They couldn't see that technology was reshaping the world, that the skills I wanted to develop would be valuable in ways they couldn't imagine. I'm going to Stanford, I said quietly but firmly. I've already accepted their offer. The ensuing argument lasted for hours, but I held my ground. It was the first time I had openly defied the path they had laid out for me, and while it was terrifying, it was also exhilarating. I was choosing my own future, even if it meant disappointing the people I'd spent my whole life trying to please. That night established the pattern that would define our family dynamic for years to come. Catherine, the dutiful daughter following the prescribed path, and me, the rebellious one who insisted on forging my own way. My parents never explicitly said they were proud of Catherine and disappointed in me, but they didn't need to. It was evident in every interaction, every holiday gathering, every family discussion about the future. As I packed for Stanford that August, my mother hovered in the doorway of my bedroom. I just don't understand why you need to go so far away, Sabrina. There are perfectly good schools here that would keep you close to family. What she meant was close to their influence and control. I need to do this, Mom, I said carefully, folding a sweater that would probably be too warm for California. I need to see if I can make it on my own terms. She sighed, twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit she only displayed when truly upset. Your father built all of this for you and Catherine. He just wants to know it will continue, that his hard work meant something. There are different ways to build a legacy, I replied, but I could tell from her expression that in her mind there was only one way, the Thompson way, and I was rejecting it. The day I left for Stanford, Catherine didn't even come downstairs to say goodbye. My father gave me a stiff hug and reminded me that the offer to study business instead was still open. My mother cried and made me promise to call every Sunday. As the car pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I felt equal parts terrified and liberated. I was on my own now, for better or worse. The next 10 years were a whirlwind of professional growth, personal discoveries, and an increasingly strained relationship with my family. After graduating from Stanford with honors, I landed my first job at a cybersecurity firm in San Francisco. The starting salary wasn't impressive, especially by Thompson standards, but I was doing what I loved and making my own way. My tiny studio apartment in the Mission District was a far cry from the spacious bedroom I'd grown up in. At 450 square feet, it barely had room for a bed and a desk, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. I decorated it with colorful posters of vintage computer advertisements and string lights that I programmed to respond to music. It wasn't fancy, but it felt more like home than the echoing, pristine rooms of my parents' mansion ever had. You're living like a college student, my mother remarked with thinly veiled horror when she and my father visited once, the only time they ever came to see me in California. Surely you could afford something a bit more appropriate. What she meant was something that wouldn't embarrass them if their friends asked about my living situation. But I loved my little space and the freedom it represented. While my day job kept me busy securing corporate networks against increasingly sophisticated threats, my evenings and weekends were dedicated to my true passion, exploring emerging technologies. It was during this time, around 2010 and 2011, that I first became interested in cryptocurrency. Bitcoin was still in its infancy then, a fringe concept discussed primarily by tech enthusiasts and libertarian-minded programmers. I was fascinated by the blockchain technology behind it and the potential for a decentralized financial system. Out of curiosity, I set up a mining operation on my home computer, nothing fancy, just a way to learn about the process firsthand. "You're doing what now?" my sister Catherine asked during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. She had, as expected, joined our father's business right after getting her MBA and was already making waves in the New England real estate scene. "Mining Bitcoin," I explained, knowing she wouldn't really understand or care. "It's a digital currency that uses cryptography to—" "Sounds like internet money," she interrupted with a laugh. "Not real money. Dad would have a fit if he heard you were wasting time on that instead of building a real investment portfolio." She was right about our father's reaction. During the obligatory Thompson family Christmas gathering that year, I made the mistake of mentioning my cryptocurrency experiment. "Fake internet money," he scoffed, swirling the expensive bourbon in his crystal tumbler. "That's what you're spending your time on. People have been trying to create alternative currencies for centuries, Sabrina. They always fail. Always. Currency needs the backing of governments and institutions to have any real value." "That's actually the whole point, Dad," I tried to explain. "Bitcoin is designed to operate independently of central authorities. That's what makes it revolutionary." He dismissed it with a wave of his hand, the same gesture he'd been using to wave away my ideas since childhood. "Mark my words, this Bitcoin thing will be worthless in a year. Playing with computers won't build generational wealth, Sabrina. Real estate now, that's something tangible. Something that lasts." Eventually, I stopped talking to my family about my technical interests altogether. They didn't understand, and more importantly, they didn't want to understand. In their world, success had one definition, and I wasn't meeting it. The Bitcoin mining experiment eventually fell by the wayside as I got busier with work and other projects. The process had become more resource-intensive, requiring specialized equipment I didn't have the space or money for. I stored the wallet information on an external hard drive, tossed it in a box of old tech equipment, and largely forgot about it. My career, meanwhile, was thriving. I climbed the ranks at my firm, developed a reputation as an expert in network security, and eventually took a position with a larger company that offered better benefits and more challenging projects. My salary grew, though it was still modest by Thompson standards. Catherine's life was progressing according to the family blueprint as well. She got engaged to James, the son of one of our father's business associates. A perfect match, according to my mother, who called me specifically to emphasize how wonderful it was that Catherine had found someone who understood the importance of family legacy. The engagement party was held at the country club where we'd spent countless childhood summers. I flew back for the occasion feeling like a visitor from another planet as I entered the world I had once been part of. The women in designer dresses, the men in tailored suits, the conversations about property developments and stock portfolios, it all felt so foreign to me now. "Sabrina." "You made it," Catherine exclaimed when she spotted me air-kissing my cheeks. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress, the fanciest thing I owned, but clearly not up to the standards of the event. "How nice that you could come all this way." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, trying to sound sincere. "Congratulations, Catherine. James seems great." I had met him exactly once for approximately 3 minutes, but that seemed the appropriate thing to say. "He is," she agreed, beaming. "His family's development company is expanding into the Midwest, and Daddy thinks there's potential for a merger in the future. It's so perfect, really. The combined Thompson-Westfield portfolio would be unstoppable." Of course, it came back to business. In my family, even marriage was a strategic alliance. "And what about you?" she continued with the slightly condescending tone she always used when discussing my life choices. "Still doing that computer security thing." "Cybersecurity," I corrected automatically. "Yes, I'm actually leading a team now that's developing new encryption protocols for financial institutions." "That sounds—" she searched for a word— "complicated. But you always did like puzzles and things." She glanced over my shoulder, clearly already looking for a more interesting conversation. Oh, I need to say hello to the Andersons. They just flew in from their villa in Tuscany. We'll catch up more later, okay? We both knew we wouldn't. The wedding itself, 6 months later, was an even more elaborate affair. I was invited, but not included in the bridal party. Catherine chose her sorority sisters and the daughters of my parents' friends instead. I sat in the third row during the ceremony, watching as my sister fulfilled another chapter of the Thompson family expectations, feeling both detached from and wistful for a sense of belonging I'd never really had. It was at the reception after several glasses of champagne that my mother cornered me near the dessert table. "You know, Sabrina, you're 30 now," she said, straightening the lapel of my jacket unnecessarily. "Have you given any thought to settling down? I could introduce you to several suitable young men. Robert's son Michael is divorced now and he's taking over his father's investment firm next year." "I'm not interested in being set up, Mom," I said, stepping back from her adjustments. "Besides, I'm seeing someone." This was a slight exaggeration. I had been on 3 dates with a software engineer named David, but nothing serious had developed. "Someone from your computer world?" she asked, barely hiding her distaste. "Well, I suppose that's better than nothing, though you really should consider moving back east. Family should be together and your father isn't getting any younger. The business will need fresh blood eventually. Catherine and James will provide that," I pointed out. "That's been the plan all along, hasn't it?" She sighed, the same disappointed sigh I'd been hearing since I first showed more interest in circuit boards than social climbing. "Plans can change, Sabrina. You could still be part of the family business if you wanted to. Your father would welcome you back." But we both knew that wasn't true. I would always be the daughter who chose a different path, the one who rejected the carefully constructed future they had envisioned. In their eyes, that made me not just different, but somehow lesser. The economic downturn of 2020 hit the tech industry hard, including the company I worked for. Despite my senior position and strong performance record, I found myself among those laid off as the company struggled to stay afloat. For the first time since college, I was unemployed and watching my modest savings dwindle as I searched for a new position in an increasingly competitive market. After 3 months of unsuccessful job hunting and with my rent due, I swallowed my pride and called my father. It was the first time I had ever asked him for financial help as an adult, and the conversation was every bit as painful as I had anticipated. "So this computer career isn't as stable as you thought," was his opening response after I explained my situation. I could picture him sitting in his leather office chair looking out over the city he had helped build. "It's a temporary setback, Dad. The whole industry is struggling right now, but I have promising interviews lined up. I just need a loan to get through the next couple of months until I land something new." There was a long pause. "You know the offer to join the family business has always been open, Sabrina. We could use someone with your technical knowledge as we modernize our operations." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of their expectations. "I appreciate that, Dad, but my career is in cybersecurity. That's where my skills and passion are." "Passion doesn't pay the bills," he replied coldly. "But if you're determined to waste your potential, I suppose we can help in the short term. I'll have my assistant transfer some money to your account. Consider it a loan, though. We'll discuss repayment terms once you're employed again." "Thank you," I said, the words tasting bitter. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can." "See that you do," he replied. "And Sabrina, think about what I said. There's no shame in admitting you made a mistake. Sometimes the path laid out for us is the right one after all." As I hung up, I felt a mixture of relief at solving my immediate financial problem and deep resentment at having to ask for help, and the strings that inevitably came attached to it. My parents had never been able to offer support without also offering judgment, and this time was no exception. 3 weeks later, the money arrived in my account. Exactly the amount I had asked for, not a dollar more. Attached was an email from my father's assistant with a formal loan agreement drawn up by the family lawyer, including interest terms and a repayment schedule. It was all very businesslike, very Thompson. Money without warmth, assistance without compassion. I signed the document, sent it back, and promised myself I would repay every cent as quickly as possible, severing this newest tie of obligation. 2 months later, I secured a new position with a government contractor working on securing critical infrastructure against cyber threats. The salary was better than my previous job, and I immediately began setting aside money to repay my father. The incident reinforced what I had always known in my family love and approval were conditional based on following the prescribed path. I had chosen a different road, and while I didn't regret it, I had to accept the consequences, including the emotional distance that had become the defining feature of my relationship with my parents and sister. My grandmother Rose was always something of an enigma in the Thompson family. She was my father's mother, widowed young and fiercely independent. While she participated in family events and certainly enjoyed the comforts that my father's wealth provided, she maintained her own home, drove her own car well into her 80s, and generally lived life on her own terms. In retrospect, I should have recognized the kindred spirit she was, but when you're young, you often miss the allies hiding in plain sight. When we received the call that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep at 89, it hit me harder than I expected. Grandma Rose had always been kind to me, sending birthday cards with thoughtful notes and asking genuine questions about my life during holiday gatherings. But I hadn't made the effort to really know her, assuming she was cut from the same cloth as the rest of the Thompsons. The funeral was held at the same stately church where all family ceremonies took place. Catherine flew in from a business trip in London. My parents orchestrated everything with their usual efficiency, and I took a week off work to fly back east. It was the first time the four of us had been together in nearly 2 years. "You look thin," was my mother's greeting at the airport. "Are you eating properly? California food is so strange with all those raw vegetables and things." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, giving her a brief hug. "Just been busy with work." I didn't mention that my new job often meant 12-hour days and meals grabbed at my desk. It would only lead to another lecture about work-life balance from a woman who had never held a job herself. The funeral itself was dignified and well attended. Grandma Rose had been active in various charitable organizations, and the church was filled with people whose lives she had touched. I sat between my mother and sister in the front pew, listening to eulogies that painted a picture of a woman I wished I had known better. Strong-willed, generous with a wry sense of humor I had only glimpsed. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following day at the offices of Patterson and Wyatt, the law firm that had handled the Thompson family's legal affairs for generations. We gathered in a conference room with mahogany paneling and oil paintings of stern-looking founding partners, the four of us seated on one side of the table facing Franklin Patterson, a silver-haired man who had been my grandmother's personal attorney for decades. Rose was very specific about her wishes. Patterson began after the preliminary expressions of sympathy. She revised her will just last year and was of completely sound mind when she did so. He proceeded to outline the distribution of my grandmother's considerable assets. Though she had lived modestly, she had inherited well from her own family and invested wisely throughout her life. The bulk of her estate, several valuable properties and investment accounts, was divided between my father and a handful of charities she had supported. Catherine received my grandmother's vacation home in Vermont, a place we had visited for occasional ski weekends in my childhood. Catherine has always appreciated the value of gathering family together in a beautiful setting, read the accompanying note which Patterson delivered in his measured tones. I sat quietly, not expecting much. I had chosen a life outside the family business after all, and assumed my inheritance would reflect that distance. But as Patterson continued, I realized I was the only family member who hadn't yet been mentioned. "And to my granddaughter, Sabrina Thompson," Patterson finally said, adjusting his reading glasses. "I leave the contents of my storage unit at Secure Storage Solutions on Maple Avenue, unit number 247. The rental is paid up for 1 year from my death." There was a moment of stunned silence. A storage unit. While my father and sister received properties worth millions, I was left the contents of what was essentially a glorified closet. Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Rose added a personal note here. "Sabrina, you've always had the courage to look for value where others couldn't see it. I trust you'll find what matters in what I've left you. I felt my face grow hot as I processed this bizarre bequest. What could possibly be in a storage unit that would compare to what the others had received? The practical side of my brain wondered if there were family heirlooms there, jewelry perhaps, or antiques that might have some monetary value. But another part of me knew that if there had been anything of obvious worth, my grandmother would have specified it. Catherine was the first to break the silence with a laugh that sliced through the formal atmosphere of the conference room. A storage unit. Seriously? It's probably full of old magazines and broken furniture. She turned to me with a smirk. Good luck, loser, my mother gasped. Catherine, that's not appropriate, but there was no real force behind her admonishment. My father simply looked uncomfortable, staring down at his hands folded on the table. Is there anything else, Mr. Patterson? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. That concludes the specific bequests, he replied with a nod. The remainder of Rose's liquid assets will be divided as outlined in Section 12 of the document primarily among her designated charitable foundations. As the meeting concluded and we gathered our things to leave, I felt a curious sense of detachment as if I were watching the scene from outside my body. My father mumbled something about not understanding Rose's thinking, but made no move to address the obvious disparity. My mother avoided my eyes entirely, and Catherine continued to look amused, as if the whole thing were an elaborate joke at my expense. Outside on the sidewalk, my sister couldn't resist one more dig. I guess Grandma Rose finally saw things Dad's way. The tech rebel gets the junk, while the loyal family members get the goods. She dangled her car keys, the Vermont house key, already added to her ring. Need a ride to your storage unit? I hear there's good money in collecting aluminum cans these days. I looked at her, my own sister taking pleasure in my pain, and then at my parents who stood by uncomfortably but made no move to intervene. In that moment, something hardened inside me. Not anger exactly, but a calm, clear recognition of what my family truly was and where I stood with them. I'll manage, I said quietly. Then I turned and walked away from them head high despite the tears threatening to spill. I heard my mother call my name once, but I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. In my rental car parked a block away, I finally allowed myself to break down. The tears came in hot, silent streams as I gripped the steering wheel and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had my grandmother really thought so little of me? Had she, like the rest of my family, seen my life choices as a rejection of their values worthy of punishment? It didn't track with the woman I remembered, kind, independent, seemingly supportive of my path. But perhaps that had been my own projection, seeing what I wanted to see in the only family member who hadn't openly criticized my decisions. As my tears subsided, I found myself questioning everything. Had I made a mistake walking away from the family business? Was my modest career in cybersecurity really worth the sacrifice of family connection and financial security? For the first time in years, I allowed doubt to creep in, wondering if perhaps my parents had been right all along. Then I remembered my grandmother's note. You've always had the courage to look for value where others couldn't see it. There was something deliberate in those words, something that didn't fit with the cruel joke that the storage unit appeared to be. I wiped my eyes, started the car, and made a decision. Tomorrow, I would visit this storage unit. Whatever was or wasn't there, I needed to see it for myself before I left town. I owed my grandmother that much at least. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I navigated the rental car through the outskirts of town to find secure storage solutions. It was in an industrial area I barely recognized, surrounded by warehouses and repair shops, a far cry from the manicured neighborhoods where my family lived and worked. The facility itself was a sprawling complex of identical orange buildings with roll-up doors surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. I parked in the small lot outside the office, a prefabricated building with faded posters advertising moving supplies in the windows. Inside, a man in his 60s looked up from a crossword puzzle as the door chime announced my arrival. His name tag read, Frank. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. "I'm here about Unit 247. It belonged to my grandmother, Rose Thompson. She recently passed away and left it to me in her will." Frank's face softened with recognition. "Miss Rose, oh, I'm real sorry to hear that. She was a special lady. Came by once a month like clockwork to check on her unit." This caught me by surprise. "She visited regularly. I thought maybe it was just storage for things she didn't have room for at home." "Oh no," Frank said, reaching for a filing cabinet behind the counter. "Miss Rose was real particular about that unit. Always paid her bill early, always spent at least an hour inside when she visited. Never said what she kept in there, but it meant something to her, that's for sure." A small spark of curiosity began to replace my disappointment. What had my grandmother been so carefully tending in this storage unit? After checking my ID and having me sign several forms, Frank handed me a key attached to an orange plastic fob with the unit number. "It's in Building C, about halfway down on the right. Take your time and let me know if you need anything. We're open till 6 today." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful for his kindness. "Did you know my grandmother well?" "Just from her visits here, but she always took time to chat. Asked about my grandkids, remembered their names and everything. Not everyone treats people in service jobs that way, you know. She was a real lady." He hesitated, then added, "She mentioned you sometimes. Seemed real proud." I blinked in surprise. "She talked about me," Frank nodded. "Said her granddaughter was making a name for herself in California, doing important work with computers. Said you were a lot like her, forging your own path." He shrugged. "Just thought you might want to know that." I thanked him again, too choked up to say more, and headed out to find Building C. Frank's words echoed in my mind as I walked along the rows of identical storage units. My grandmother had been proud of me, had talked about me to a virtual stranger. It didn't align with the woman who would leave me a storage unit while my sister got a vacation home. Unit 247 was exactly where Frank had said it would be, its orange roll-up door indistinguishable from the dozens surrounding it, except for the number stenciled in black. I inserted the key into the padlock, turned it, and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the door. The interior was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb that flickered on automatically as the door rose. At first glance, it looked exactly as Catherine had predicted. A jumble of old furniture, stacked boxes, and what appeared to be outdated household items. My heart sank despite my attempt to keep an open mind. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I stepped inside, careful not to bump into the precariously stacked boxes nearest the entrance. The unit was about 10 by 15 feet, packed nearly to the ceiling in some areas, but with a narrow path cleared down the middle. The air smelled of dust and old paper with a hint of the lavender sachets my grandmother had always kept in her drawers. I started with the nearest box, labeled simply Books, in my grandmother's neat handwriting. Inside were dozens of technical manuals and early computer guides from the 1980s and 90s. Introduction to Basic Programming. Understanding the First Personal Computers. The Internet Revolution. Books I would have devoured as a teenager but had never seen in my grandmother's house. Puzzled, I opened another box. This one contained carefully preserved magazines, early issues of Wired Computer World, and other tech publications, some dating back to before I was born. A third box held what looked like components from early personal computers, motherboards, expansion cards, even a Commodore 64 still in its original packaging. My confusion deepened. Why would my grandmother, who to my knowledge had barely used email, have collected all these technological artifacts, and why leave them to me without explanation? As I continued exploring, moving deeper into the unit, the collection became more extensive and more puzzling. There were boxes of floppy disks, early mobile phones, even what appeared to be prototype devices with handwritten notes attached. It was like a private museum of computing history, carefully preserved and organized. In one corner, partially hidden behind an old desk, I found a fireproof safe. It wasn't locked. The The key was taped to the top with a note in my grandmother's handwriting, "For Sabrina's eyes only." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. The journal's first page had my name written at the top, followed by a short message. "Dearest Sabrina, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to whatever comes next, and you found my little collection. I've watched you since you were a little girl, seeing myself in your curiosity and determination. What your parents never understood about either of us is that true wealth isn't just in land or buildings. It's in ideas and seeing the future before others do. I couldn't speak openly about my interests while your grandfather was alive. He was a good man, but set in his ways like your father. So I created this space, my own little world, where I could explore the technologies that fascinated me. I've left the bulk of my conventional assets to your father and Catherine because they'll value them in the way they understand. But this collection, my true passion, I leave to you, the only one who will appreciate what it really means. There's more to tell, but some things are better discovered than explained. Trust your instincts as I've always trusted them. With all my love, Grandma Rose." I sat on an old office chair, the journal clutched to my chest, tears flowing freely now. All these years, my grandmother had been a kindred spirit, living a double life of sorts. The proper Thompson matriarch in public, but privately nurturing the same passion for technology that had driven me since childhood, and I had never known. Over the next 3 days, I methodically went through every box in the storage unit, documenting what I found, reading through journals and notes that revealed a side of my grandmother I had never imagined. She had been an early investor in several tech companies, had corresponded with computing pioneers, had even written code herself in the early days of personal computing, all hidden from a family that wouldn't have understood or approved. It was on the third day, as I reached the back corner of the unit, that I found a cardboard box simply labeled S 2011. Inside were various external hard drives, USB sticks, and other storage devices, carefully wrapped in anti-static bags. At the bottom, in a padded envelope, was an older model external hard drive with a sticky note attached. "From your apartment, 2011. You might want this someday." I stared at it in confusion. How did my grandmother have a hard drive from my apartment? Then it hit me. This must have been from when I moved from my first San Francisco apartment to a slightly larger one in 2011. My parents had been visiting California for a rare business trip, and my mother had insisted on helping me pack properly. Several boxes of what she deemed unnecessary clutter had disappeared during that process, supposedly donated to charity on my behalf. Had my grandmother somehow intercepted that donation, recognizing the potential value in what my mother saw as junk? It seemed incredible, but no more incredible than everything else I had discovered in the past few days. I carefully packed the hard drive, along with the most important documents and smaller items from the unit, to take back to California. The larger pieces would require a moving company, but that could wait. Right now, I needed to see what was on that hard drive from 2011, the year I had briefly experimented with Bitcoin mining. Back in my hotel room, I connected the external hard drive to my laptop, not sure if it would even still function after all these years. To my surprise, it powered up immediately. My grandmother had apparently taken good care of it, perhaps even ensuring it was occasionally powered to prevent deterioration. The drive contained various folders of old projects, photos, and documents from that period of my life. But what I was looking for would be in a specific folder, one that I had named BTC Experiment, in my typical organized fashion. There it was, nestled among files I had forgotten creating. I clicked on it, heart racing slightly at the prospect of what might still be there. Inside were several files documenting my brief foray into cryptocurrency mining. Spreadsheets tracking energy usage versus coins mined, notes on optimizing the process, and most importantly, a wallet. Dat file containing the Bitcoin I had mined. In 2011, I had set up a mining operation on my home computer, out of curiosity more than any belief in Bitcoin's future value. Over several months, I had mined approximately 1,200 Bitcoins, worth almost nothing at the time, which was partly why I had eventually abandoned the experiment. When I stopped, I had backed up the wallet to this external drive, then largely forgotten about it as my focus shifted to other projects in my growing career. Now I stared at the wallet, that file, my pulse quickening as I realized what it might represent. Bitcoin's value had skyrocketed since those early days. If I could still access these coins if they hadn't somehow been corrupted or lost, I needed to be methodical about this. The stakes were potentially too high to rush. I spent the next several hours researching the best way to recover an old Bitcoin wallet, careful not to make any moves that might compromise the data. This was where my cybersecurity background proved invaluable. I understood the risks and the necessary precautions better than most. After creating multiple backups of the original drive, I followed the technical steps to access the wallet. The process was tense, requiring carefully implemented recovery procedures and patience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of command prompts and progress bars, I was able to view the wallet contents. 200 bitcoins. Still there. Untouched since 2011. With trembling fingers, I opened a browser tab and searched for the current Bitcoin price. The number that appeared made me gasp audibly in the empty hotel room. At current valuation, my forgotten experiment was worth over $75 million. I closed my laptop and stepped away, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen, especially not to people like me who had always worked hard for modest gains. I paced the small hotel room, alternating between disbelief, euphoria, and sheer panic. If this was real, and I had every reason to believe it was, I had just become wealthy beyond anything I had ever imagined. More wealthy, ironically, than what I would likely have inherited had I stayed in the family business. All because of a technological experiment my family had dismissed as a waste of time. And all because my grandmother, who I had never truly known in life, had secretly rescued and preserved a discarded hard drive, somehow knowing it might be important someday. Once the initial shock subsided, the practical side of my brain took over. I needed to secure this asset properly before doing anything else. Over the next 24 hours, I consulted discreetly with cryptocurrency security experts and took steps to transfer the Bitcoin to more secure modern storage methods. I moved small test amounts first, confirming everything worked correctly before committing the full amount. I also reached out to financial advisors who specialized in sudden wealth situations, particularly those with expertise in cryptocurrency. On their advice, I converted a portion of the Bitcoin to traditional currency, enough to ensure financial security even if the crypto market crashed, but leaving a significant amount in Bitcoin as a continuing investment. As these practical matters were handled, a deeper realization began to settle in. This windfall wasn't just about money, it was a vindication of sorts. The path I had chosen, the interests I had pursued despite my family's disapproval, had led to this moment. My grandmother had seen value in me where the rest of my family hadn't, just as she had seen potential value in Bitcoin when others dismissed it as worthless. The storage unit wasn't a cruel joke or an afterthought. It was perhaps the most meaningful inheritance any Thompson had ever received. I returned to California without telling my family about my discovery. I needed time to process everything, to make plans, and to decide how much, if anything, I wanted to share with the people who had made me feel less than for most of my life. That decision was taken out of my hands 3 weeks later, when Bitcoin experienced another significant price surge, making headlines across financial news networks. A cousin who followed cryptocurrency markets made the connection to my old mining hobby and mentioned it to Catherine during a family dinner. My sister's call came at 7 a.m. Pacific time, waking me from a sound sleep. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "Tell me it's not true." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Good morning to you too, Catherine. What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Sabrina. The Bitcoin. Austin says you used to mine it back in the day. He says if you kept any, it would be worth millions now. Tens of millions." I paused, considering how to respond. Part of me wanted to lie to protect my newfound wealth from family members who had never shown genuine interest in my well-being. But another part of me knew the truth would come out eventually. I did mine some Bitcoin years ago, yes, I said carefully. And I recently recovered the wallet. Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible. How much? She demanded. How much do you have? That's personal financial information, Catherine. I don't ask about your investment portfolio. This is different. Her voice rose, taking on the entitled tone I knew so well. This is just dumb luck. You didn't earn this. You just happened to play around with some computer thing that randomly became valuable. The irony wasn't lost on me. As opposed to being born into a wealthy family, that kind of luck. There was a moment of stunned silence before she continued, her voice now tight with controlled anger. The family should benefit from this. We're Thompsons. Thompson money stays in the family. That's what Dad always says. This isn't Thompson money, I replied evenly. I mined this Bitcoin on my own with my own equipment, using knowledge I gained studying a field you all dismissed as worthless. This isn't over, Catherine snapped before hanging up. I stared at the phone knowing she was right. This wasn't over. And sure enough, 3 days later my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. You should have called first, I said as I let them in, acutely aware of how my modest one-bedroom must look to them after their mansion and Catherine's luxury penthouse. My father surveyed the space with barely concealed disdain. We tried. You didn't answer. We were worried about you, darling, my mother added, removing her designer gloves finger by finger. After what Catherine told us, well, sudden wealth can be very disorienting. We wanted to make sure you're getting proper advice. I gestured for them to sit on my small sofa while I took the armchair opposite. I'm fine, Mom. I've already consulted with financial advisors who specialize in cryptocurrency. Those crypto people are all snake oil salesmen, my father dismissed with a wave. You need real financial management. Thompson money needs Thompson-level care. There it was again. The assumption that anything of value connected to me automatically became Thompson money, subject to family oversight and control. Dad, this isn't family money. This is mine. I mined these Bitcoins when everyone, including you, told me I was wasting my time on internet fads. That's beside the point now, he replied, leaning forward intently. What matters is protecting this windfall and integrating it properly into the family holdings. I've already spoken with our estate planners about the most tax-efficient way to— Wait, I interrupted, holding up a hand. You've been discussing my personal finances with the family estate planners without my knowledge or consent. My mother jumped in, her tone soothing. Darling, your father is only trying to help. This is what he does. He manages family wealth. And now, thankfully, you have some wealth to manage. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. In her mind, I had been playing at a career while waiting for a stroke of luck to earn my way back into the family's financial embrace. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I've already taken steps to secure and manage these assets. This is my money earned through my interests and expertise preserved by Grandma Rose, who apparently believed in me more than anyone else in this family ever has. My father's expression darkened. Your grandmother left you that storage unit because she was becoming senile in her later years. She had no idea what was in it. If she had known about this Bitcoin business, she would have made very different arrangements. That's not true, I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. She knew exactly what she was doing. She left me journals explaining everything. Journals? My mother looked confused. What journals? I hadn't intended to reveal that detail, but now that it was out, I continued. Grandma Rose had been interested in technology since the 1980s. She collected computing artifacts, invested in tech companies, even learned to code. She kept it all in that storage unit because she knew the family wouldn't understand or approve, just like you never understood or approved of my interests. My parents exchanged glances, clearly blindsided by this information. My mother recovered first. That's hard to believe, Sabrina. Your grandmother was a traditional woman who cared about family legacy above all else. She cared about legacy, yes, but she had a broader definition of what that meant than the rest of you. She saw value in innovation and looking forward instead of just preserving what already exists. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Regardless of these fantastical claims about your grandmother, the fact remains that this Bitcoin windfall should benefit the entire family. That's what Thompsons do. We share our success. When have any of you shared your success with me? I asked quietly. When I was struggling, when I needed a loan, you treated it like a business transaction, complete with interest and repayment terms. That was different, he insisted. That was about teaching responsibility. And this is about respecting boundaries. The Bitcoin is mine. I'm not looking for your approval or permission regarding how I manage it. Catherine chose that moment to call my father as if psychically aware that her intervention might be needed. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone speaker as my father held it slightly away from his ear. Did she agree? Is she going to do the right thing? Tell her we're looking at legal options. My father grimaced and lowered the volume. Catherine is understandably concerned about family unity in this matter, he explained smoothly. Family unity, I repeated incredulously. The same family unity that led to good luck loser when you thought I'd inherited nothing of value. That kind of family unity. My mother at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Catherine shouldn't have said that. It was unkind. But you must understand, Sabrina, this situation creates a significant imbalance in the family dynamic. Your sister has worked hard in the family business for years and now suddenly, I'm not the poor relation anymore, I finished for her. Suddenly the daughter who chose the wrong path has something you all want, and that's uncomfortable for everyone. An awkward silence fell over the room. I could see my father struggling between his desire to maintain control and the realization that his usual tactics weren't working. My mother kept glancing around my apartment as if searching for evidence that I had already begun spending recklessly. Finally, my father tried a different approach. At least consider investing some of this windfall in the family business. We're expanding into the Austin market, and additional capital would accelerate our timeline. It would be a solid investment for you with guaranteed returns. I'll think about it. I said not because I had any intention of doing so, but because it seemed the fastest way to end this increasingly tense conversation. That's all we ask, my mother said with obvious relief. Just think about what's best for the family as a whole. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. You know, Sabrina, money changes people. Be careful that it doesn't change you into someone who forgets where she came from. The irony of this statement coming from a man who had consistently valued wealth over genuine connection was not lost on me, but I simply nodded and showed them out, locking the door behind them with a sense of finality. Their visit had made one thing crystal clear. My newfound wealth hadn't earned me respect or acceptance from my family. It had simply made me a resource they wished to control. The conditional nature of their love had never been more apparent. In the days that followed, their attempts to influence my financial decisions grew more aggressive. Catherine sent links to family investment opportunities, followed by thinly veiled threats about consulting attorneys regarding the rightful distribution of grandmother's assets. My father had the family lawyer contact me about potential tax implications that could be mitigated through certain family trust structures. My mother took a softer approach, calling with tearful concerns about family harmony and tradition. I let all their messages go to voicemail after the first few exhausting conversations. Then when Catherine showed up at my apartment unannounced, ostensibly to apologize, but quickly revealing her true purpose to present a business proposal for a joint venture, I realized I needed to set firm boundaries. I think you should leave, I said after she finished her pitch, which amounted to me providing capital while she maintained control. What? She looked genuinely surprised. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something meaningful, to put this random windfall to productive use. No, you're offering me a chance to give you access to my money while treating me exactly as you always have, like a lesser member of this family whose only value is what you can extract from me. Her expression hardened. That's a nasty thing to say to your sister. After everything our family has done for you. What exactly has our family done for me, Catherine? besides consistently undermining my choices and treating me like a disappointment. We've always included you. Even when you chose to abandon family tradition, we kept a place for you. And now, when you're suddenly flush with cash, you did nothing to earn you want to act like we're the bad guys for expecting some family loyalty. I took a deep breath, suddenly tired of this cycle. Please leave, Catherine. I'm not giving you my Bitcoin. I'm not investing in family ventures. I'm going to live my life on my terms, just as I've been trying to do all along. This isn't over, she warned, as she gathered her designer purse and headed for the door. The exact same words she'd used on the phone. Actually, it is, I replied quietly. At least as far as I'm concerned. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the genuine family connection I had never really had, and relief at finally setting boundaries that should have been established years ago. My grandmother's journals had shown me that it was possible to forge your own path without completely severing family ties. She had maintained her public role in the Thompson family while privately nurturing her true interests, but she had lived with a division that I wasn't willing to accept any longer. It was time to create a life that fully aligned with my values, surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could provide. My grandmother had given me more than Bitcoin. She had given me the permission and courage to be fully myself. The months that followed my Bitcoin discovery were transformative in ways I never could have predicted. After the confrontation with my family, I made several life-changing decisions that set me on a path toward healing and personal growth. First, I sought out a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and sudden wealth syndrome. Dr. Melissa Jennings helped me work through the complex emotions surrounding my family relationships and navigate the psychological impact of financial independence. Our weekly sessions became a safe space to process decades of feeling like an outsider in my own family. What you're experiencing is actually quite common among people who suddenly acquire wealth, Dr. Jennings explained during one of our early sessions. The money itself doesn't create problems. It amplifies what was already there. In your case, it's bringing long-standing family dynamics into sharper focus. She was right. The Bitcoin hadn't created the conditional nature of my family's love or their tendency to value financial success above all else. It had simply made these patterns impossible to ignore any longer. With Dr. Jennings' guidance, I began to set healthier boundaries. I limited contact with my family, responding to their increasingly aggressive financial proposals, with brief, firm messages reiterating my position. When my father attempted to involve family lawyers in what he termed the Bitcoin situation, I had my own attorney send a cease and desist letter, a move that shocked the Thompsons, who weren't accustomed to being on the receiving end of legal notices. Meanwhile, I focused on creating a life that reflected my values. After careful consideration, I decided to leave my government contracting position to start my own cybersecurity consulting firm, specializing in protecting small and medium-sized businesses that typically couldn't afford enterprise-level security services. I used a portion of my Bitcoin wealth to fund the startup costs, assembling a team of talented professionals who shared my vision of making cybersecurity accessible to organizations with limited resources. I also established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in computer science and cybersecurity, naming it after my grandmother, the Rose Thompson Technology Scholarship. The program specifically targeted young women and students from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing not just financial support, but mentorship opportunities and internships at my new company. Your grandmother would be proud. Frank from the storage facility told me when I called to let him know I'd be emptying the unit and donating most of its contents to a technology museum. She always said you were going to do important things someday. I wish I'd known her better, I replied, thinking of all the conversations we could have had about our shared interests. I feel like I only discovered who she really was after she was gone. That's often the way with family, Frank said with the wisdom of his years. We think we know people because we're related to them, but sometimes we never really see them clearly until something shifts our perspective. Something had indeed shifted my perspective. Not just the Bitcoin discovery, but the understanding that my grandmother had seen and valued me when no one else in my family had bothered to look beyond their expectations. As for my living situation, I decided against the mansion or luxury penthouse that might have been expected given my new financial status. Instead, I purchased a comfortable but modest home in a quiet neighborhood with a dedicated space for a home office and a guest room that I doubted any Thompson would ever use. It was a place that felt like mine, warm, functional, without the cold ostentation that had characterized my childhood home. My family's attempts to access my Bitcoin wealth continued for several months, growing increasingly desperate as they realized I was serious about maintaining my independence. Catherine tried different tactics, from tearful apologies to outright threats about contesting our grandmother's will. My parents vacillated between guilt trips about family loyalty and attempts to convince me that they only wanted what was best for me. The turning point came 6 months after the initial discovery when Catherine showed up at my new home unannounced, clutching a folder of documents. "You need to look at these," she insisted, pushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. "I've had our accountants run the numbers, and there's a way we can structure this that benefits everyone. It's a win-win, Sabrina." I took the folder but didn't open it. "Catherine, we've been over this. The Bitcoin is mine, and I've already made decisions about how I'm going to use it." "You're being selfish," she snapped, her conciliatory facade cracking. "That money should be benefiting the whole family, not just funding your little computer hobby." My little computer hobby is now a successful company providing affordable cybersecurity to businesses that need protection from increasingly sophisticated threats, I replied evenly. "And the scholarship program has already helped 12 students who wouldn't otherwise have had access to technology education." "Do you have any idea what that kind of capital could do in the real estate market?" she countered as if I hadn't spoken. "Dad's Austin development could be twice as large with proper funding. The returns would benefit everyone, including you." I handed the folder back to her unopened. "This conversation is over, Catherine. It was over months ago. I'm not investing in family real estate ventures, and I'm not seeking your approval for how I use my own money." Something in my tone must have finally gotten through to her. She stared at me for a long moment, a mix of emotions crossing her face: anger, disbelief, and perhaps for the first time a glimmer of understanding that she couldn't control this situation. "You've changed," she said finally, her voice quieter. "No," I replied. "I'm the same person I've always been. The difference is that I'm no longer trying to earn approval that was always conditional. I'm living my life according to my own values, not the family's expectations." She looked around my home, comfortable but nowhere near the luxury she was accustomed to, and seemed puzzled. "You could have anything you want now. And this is what you choose, a normal house and a small business. What I want isn't what you want, Catherine. It never has been. The difference now is that I'm at peace with that." After she left, I sat in my garden for a long time reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. The Bitcoin wealth had given me financial independence, yes, but the real gift had been the freedom to create boundaries and live authentically. My grandmother had somehow known that this was what I truly needed, not just money, but the validation that my path had value. Over the following year, the relationship with my family shifted into something different. Not warm or close, but no longer actively hostile. My parents eventually stopped their attempts to access my Bitcoin wealth, though my father occasionally still sent investment opportunities, just in case you're interested. Catherine, after several more attempts at reconciliation that quickly revealed ulterior motives, finally accepted that our relationship would remain distant but cordial. And me, I found a kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. My company thrived, providing meaningful work and financial security without the burden of family expectations. The scholarship program expanded, creating opportunities for students who reminded me of myself at their age, passionate about technology, but without the resources or support to pursue their dreams. I also developed genuine friendships and even a promising romantic relationship with David, a fellow technology entrepreneur who appreciated me for who I was, not what I owned. He knew about the Bitcoin wealth, but treated it as an interesting footnote rather than a defining characteristic, which was refreshingly different from how my family had responded. As for the remaining Bitcoin, I continued to manage it carefully, using portions to fund projects I believed in while maintaining enough to ensure long-term security. The value fluctuated, of course. Cryptocurrency remains volatile, but I had diversified sufficiently that these fluctuations didn't affect my peace of mind. On what would have been my grandmother's 90th birthday, I opened the Rose Thompson Technology Innovation Center, a workspace and incubator for women and underrepresented groups in tech. The center occupied a renovated warehouse in a revitalizing neighborhood, offering resources, mentorship, and community to those who might otherwise struggle to find their place in the tech world. During the small opening ceremony, I placed a framed photo of my grandmother in the entrance hall, alongside a quote from one of her journals. "True wealth is not in what you own, but in what you build that outlasts you." Looking at her image, I felt a deep gratitude for the woman who had secretly understood and supported me from afar, waiting for the right moment to provide not just financial resources, but the courage to fully embrace my own path. The storage unit that my sister had mockingly dismissed as worthless had contained the most valuable inheritance possible, the validation that I had been right to follow my passion to build a life around what genuinely mattered to me rather than what was expected. The Bitcoin was life-changing, certainly, but the real treasure had been discovering that I had an ally all along, someone who saw value where others couldn't or wouldn't see it. So if you're watching this and feeling like an outsider in your own life or family, remember my grandmother's wisdom. Sometimes the greatest gift is the courage to define success on your own terms, to recognize your own value, even when those closest to you cannot. And sometimes the most meaningful legacy isn't measured in dollars or property, but in the lives you touch and the barriers you break down for others. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, or if you've had someone who believed in you when others didn't. Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to forge their own path. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes what looks like trash to others contains the treasure that will change your life forever.